God, we ask your Spirit to be with us, to pry open our hearts and minds so we can receive what you have to give to us today. In these scriptures we read, songs we sing, words that are said, help us to know your need for who we are, your desire for who we can become. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So I know I've talked about my sunglasses before. Some of you may have these. They fit over my glasses, and they are polarized. I like the polarized thing because things are crisp and clear. Even with the glare, my daughter Emily calls them my old man from Arizona glasses. If you have yours with you in your purse now, I invite you to put them on. They don't go over your glasses. I've noticed, though, when I stop to get gas with these, I can't read the words and the numbers at the gas pump. I know there's got to be a scientific reason for that, but it's something about the polarization, right? So I have to tip my glasses to see how much my gas is going to cost me. Because these glasses change what I can see. And this morning, coming over the bypass on Highway 30 at about 7:45, didn't matter what I had on my eyes, the sun was directly coming at me. So maybe the rich man in our gospel today had some of the glasses like this that changed what he could see. Makes me think of the Garfield cartoon, how one cold winter, the cat Garfield looks out the window and sees Odie, the dog, peering through the window. He's outside. Garfield thinks to himself, well, this is horrible. Here I am, comfortable in the warm house and well-fed, and there's Odie outside begging to get in. It's cold and he's hungry. I just can't stand it anymore. I can't stand it. So he goes over to the window and closes the curtain. Maybe that's why he couldn't see Lazarus lying there on that gate that day in and day out. Maybe that's why he didn't notice, because he just decided to close the curtain of his mind. Maybe it was a polarization thing. And if he just tipped the glasses a bit, he'd been able to read what was going on right there in front of him all those years. But it's easy to get used to these glasses, especially for us rich people. Most of us here today fall in that category when compared to the rest of the world. So we wear these glasses that keep us from noticing those who suffer all around us. And the poor and suffering become invisible to us even when they're right there. Kind of like the numbers at the gas pump. See, I can believe that you can have sight and be blind at the same time. And a lot of things affect our ability to see. Sometimes our emotions can blind us. We can become so anxious we are unable to see what's right in front of us. And the truth is we can't pay attention to everything at the same time. Psychologists tell us that there's a little structure deep in our brainstem called the reticular activating system. It's our brain's filter. It allows us to filter through all the sensory stimuli we receive and focus only on what's important to us. The brain filter allows us to filter out the hum of the air conditioner, the itchy shirt we're wearing, the flickering light over our head, so we can actually focus and hear the sermon today. The nice thing about wearing these is you can't tell where my eyes are looking, can you? They say also there are 3 types of information that are important, that they get automatically through the filters that we have in our brains. They are things that are unique, things that we value, things that we find threatening. So every day the rich man left his estate. He had to pass by Lazarus. Do you think he ever actually paid attention to Lazarus? I doubt it. I think his reticular activating system probably filtered this poor man out of the scene. Lazarus was a nobody in the rich man's world. If you noticed at all, he was probably just disgusted with him when he went by. The rich man here reminds me of that devastating barb that Ann Richards hurled at George Bush at the Democratic Convention years ago when she said, "He was born on third base and he thinks he hit a triple." It's interesting, though, in Jesus' parable, we know Lazarus' name. We don't know, whoa, you kind of have to adjust after that. We don't know the rich man's name. But guess who counts in God's reticular activating system? Let me ask you a question. Are there people in your world that you don't even see? Needy people, hurting people, people who may need your attention? Actually, they're everywhere. Maybe even within your own family or next door or in the next cubicle at the office. They may not be covered with sores. They may not have dogs licking their sores, but you can see the hurt in their eyes. So maybe we don't have to be beggars lying outside our houses, but that doesn't mean we don't know who has needs. If we were to survey our community, we would find people with heartbreaking needs, people grieving over a dying mother, and grief changes us, parents struggling with their son or daughter's addiction, middle-aged people with a ton of guilt. My experience of us as a church having that little food pantry box that's outside our door number 1, around the drive-through, around the tree, it's made me see and realize how many people need that food. You see little kids come by and one brother stands on the other brother's shoulders and gets the stuff out of the box. Then they go around the corner and there's grandma. You see guys on bikes waiting on the corner because they figured out what time Susan puts the food out that we have left over. I've told folks, I call in on Saturday, come by after the 6 o'clock service at 7, because usually when folks come to church, they put some food in that box. But you see a different side of Grand Island. There's 7 of those boxes around town, maybe 8 now, Deb. Have we added some? 11? Yeah, and some folks hit all of them because they know the map. The first thing I want us to see from this scripture is that being a follower of Jesus changes how we see. Love, like Jesus loves, love sees. So this parable, the rich man and Lazarus, love sees. The rich man passed the poor beggar day after day and never really saw him until it was too late. You and I need to train our eyes to see those around us. Being sensitive to others is not something that comes naturally to most of us. It's something that we can improve by working at it. So love sees and love acts. I was thinking this morning, Christina, when we cranked back up Sunday school, that's part of what we're teaching, is how to see differently.
The Sunday school class wants to know why Lazarus didn't find a better house to hang around.
The Sunday school class wants to know why Lazarus didn't find a better house to hang around. It's not like it was a good house, just the owner. What's the problem? I like the story about some older people that were dining in a restaurant, and one said how interesting it would be if you could just turn back the clock and live your life over again. They said, well, you know, what I would like, they said, I'd like to be 18 years old, but know all the stuff that I know now. And at that point, the waitress who was cleaning the table stopped and said, well, I'm 18. What is it that you know? I'm 63. And what I would want to say to that 18-year-old is, now I know money is not the most important thing. Relationships, being there for each other, is the most important thing. Serving those who are less fortunate than us is the most important thing. But will the 18-year-old actually hear that? That's a whole other sermon. Fred Craddock tells of the time he and Mrs. Craddock had a guest over to their house. Fred's a Southern storytelling Oklahoma preacher, ended up teaching preaching. Fred said he would always, be reading the paper, and they had a guest over for supper, and the guest was playing with his kids and taught him a new game. And Fred thought to himself, how long has it been since I came home from work and got down on the floor and played with my kids? And he felt himself judged by the guest's actions. And after dinner, the guest said to Mrs. Craddock, I certainly appreciated this meal. That was a wonderful meal. And Fred tried to remember the last time he'd said that to his wife following dinner. He thinks it was 1949. And he was judged again. The guest went out for a walk and came back in and said, boy, those are nice folks next door. I met Mr. Young and his wife from Seoul. They're a very nice young couple. And Fred said, well, I'd heard there were some Koreans that moved in down there, but I didn't know. But he didn't know their names. And Fred said, I felt judged once again. Just a familiar pattern, says Fred. Come home, read the paper, eat supper. Then here comes someone strange, and everything looks different. And I think, where in the world have I been? Love sees differently. Love acts differently. We have no indication that the rich man was a bad man. He was just clueless. He didn't see. He didn't act. He probably spent eternity mumbling to himself, where in the world had I been? So who would be the invisible suffering in our world right now? Women and children working in sweatshops, fast food workers. How many places here in town right now are only drive-through because they don't have enough people to operate inside? How about those tortured in invisible secret prisons around the world, not just by our country, but by others? Those stuck in privately owned prisons in our country right now, especially on our nation's borders, people that have no rights. They're in prisons that make more money the longer people stay. They make more money the more people they keep. Or those in just plain old regular prisons. Did you know that our social and justice system, since the war on poverty was created, we have a situation now where there are more African American males in our prison system in the United States right now than were ever slaves at the peak of slavery. Are our prisons invisible to us? Before the Civil War, they said the percentage of black people in prison was about 5%. Since then, right now, it's about 90%. The current population in North America is around 316 million people. Triple that to try and imagine the number of people worldwide that do not get enough food. Over 840 million people. We're told about 1.1 billion people don't have clean drinking water. And that about 25,000 people die each day from hunger and hunger-related causes. That's the city of Hastings, folks. Every day. Hunger does not just happen overseas. There's 31 million people, 12 million of them children, live without enough food here in the United States. There's homelessness and hunger all around us, and it's brought into our lives every day. When we lived in Hastings, they told us you could sleep in your car if you were out by the water treatment plant because it was outside city limits. A lot of people sleep in their cars here in Grand Island, are homeless, but they figure out ways. It's against the law to sleep in your car inside the city limits, so they figure out ways to park outside. I'll bring the microscope a little closer, and the neighbor who's always complaining so much that you just stopped listening to them. Or the guy down a coffee that's always mad at something or somebody, and nobody listens to them, 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 So that's the question. Are there people in our world that we don't even see? Needy people, hurting people, people who need our attention. Actually, they're everywhere. Maybe within our own family, or next door, or in the next cubicle at the office. They may not be covered with sores. Because those who follow Jesus see differently. Those who follow Jesus act differently. The point is that those who consider themselves to be one of God's children must share with the needy. Those who worship God must show compassion to the hungry. This is not an option. We're responsible for each other. So showing compassion is the test of the reality of our faith. Professor Robert Wuthnow once conducted research about why some people are generous and compassionate and others are not. What he found was that many compassionate people at some point in their lives had someone act with compassion toward them. And that experience of having somebody show compassion toward them transformed their lives. For example, he tells the story of Jack Casey. Jack Casey has the quote, he said, "All I ever learned from my father is that I did not want to be like him." He was raised in a tough house. His dad was an alcoholic, but something happened to Jack when he was a child that changed his life. He needed to have a surgery and was terrified, but there was a nurse there at the hospital that remained by his side, holding his hand, reassuring him everything would be okay. And she said, "I'll be right here no matter what." And she kept her word. She was there, greeted him with a smile the moment he opened his eyes after the surgery. So years later, Jack became a paramedic. He was called to a scene of an accident. The man was pinned upside down in his pickup. Jack did his best to free the trapped man. Gasoline was dripping down on them. The man was afraid he was going to die. As the rescuers worked to free them, one spark and the whole scene goes up in flames. And Jack remembered back when he was that child and the nurse who never left. And he took the man's hand and squeezed it and said, "Don't worry, I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." Days after the rescue, the two men embraced as the driver said to Jack, "You know, you were crazy to stay there with me. We both could have died." And Jack smiled and just said, I couldn't leave you." The most powerful image in this story is of a big chasm, a giant ditch that separates the rich and the poor. Our calling, I believe, is to strengthen connections between the rich and the poor now, before it's too late. Every time one of us serves at a homeless shelter, helps with loaves and fishes, drops some food by the outdoor box, that chasm becomes a little less significant. Every time one of us visits in the hospital, in the prison, that chasm becomes a little easier to cross. Every time one of us spends time with an under-resourced school, that chasm becomes a little less important. Every time a physician gives her time to an immigrant community, the chasm is erased. And here's the good news. In this life, if we can cross the chasm that separates us from the poor, in the life to come, we won't be able to, but in this life, we can make that connection. And if we seek to make that connection, we'll discover many of the poor are our brothers and sisters in Christ, and they have something to give to us. And yes, we will also sometimes meet the Jesus of Matthew chapter 25, just as he promised when he said, "I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was hungry and you fed me. I was a prisoner and you visited me." So here's the point of today's passage. There was a time spiritually when each of us was a beggar lying at the gate, totally helpless, and Christ noticed us. Spiritually, Christ loved us just as we are. And as we remember that compassion, that grace, Christ calls us to look around and see someone who needs our attention, our compassion, our love. So I think these glasses maybe work the other way. Maybe they're meant just for me. And if I come across somebody that has the same need that I had, I can see them. Nobody else can. The research shows us that this person might just remember that generous attention when she was in a position needing help, and they'll help somebody else. It's a part of my funeral message. I believe if we have loved or been loved, that has a ripple effect that goes on way after we leave this earth. So the original act of kindness and love is extended maybe forever. But you can't be a part of this chain of love if you never take the time to look beyond your own cares and concerns. Maybe this passage is trying to say to us, don't be like the rich man who will forever be remembered as the person who refused to notice. Look around you today to someone who needs your kind of love. Dr. Martin Luther King says, I submit this is the challenge facing the church today, to be concerned as our Christ about the least of these, our brothers and sisters. And we must do it because in the final analysis, we are all called to live together, rich and poor, lettered and unlettered, tutored and untutored. Somehow we are tied in a single garment of destiny, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. Who thinks like that? Dr. Martin Luther King. And he says, and for some reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. We're all interconnected. This is the way God made the world, he says, and we must learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we will perish as fools. So past poverty, past vision, it's about community and the key to how community is formed. So ask somebody who digs deeper to give a sacrificial gift or packs up a bunch of clothes and takes them to those that need them. Ask somebody who spent the night in a homeless shelter volunteering, who has slept in a car or on a hard floor when they're off on a work mission for disaster relief, who's really sat down at the shelter over dinner and listened to somebody else. Because once you do something like that, and many of you have done that, once you cross over that chasm, you don't go back. You crossed over a gulf, a chasm, and you see and understand human need differently from that point on. Your vision is forever altered, and you see the world in all its richness and brutality and complexity. Christina and I have had this conversation about work missions. A lot of times people say, well, let's just help people here. And we talked about how sometimes just going out of town, helping somebody, you come back and you see your own town different than you did before. So you will see that person in front of you, the Lazaruses of your life. I believe you will see them as beloved and loved. And in seeing them different, you will act different. And the chasms of our life between the rich and poor will shrink. Amen.